dzisiaj warunkiem tego, czy w ogóle wyznacznikiem tego, co będzie dalej z Ukrainą.
Today, what will happen in Ukraine will be determined by the level of support granted by Western nations. So broadly speaking, the EU countries, but not just them, also the United States, Australia, Canada, all nations that are part of what we call the free world. Vladimir Putin wants to enslave Ukraine. He wants to expand his regime across Ukrainian territory, take away Ukrainians' freedom. Why? Because Ukrainians decided that they want to be part of the community of free nations. They want to be part of the European Union. They want to be part of NATO. This has been broadly discussed in the past few years. Myself, but not just me, many other experts as well, state very clearly that the fact that Putin first invaded Ukraine in 2014 and then launched a full-scale aggression last February 24th is a means of halting this process of Ukraine and other countries from moving from the old Soviet sphere of influence towards free democratic countries. This is the question the free world has to ask itself. Do we allow countries to be enslaved by tyrants like Putin, who deny all democratic rules, who want to terrorise and enslave others and take advantage of their potential for their own benefit? Or do we think that the free world can progress and every country has the right to self-determination? If that's what we believe in, we have to defend Ukraine.
Sir, this isn't just about Russia's war in Ukraine, as you've just said. This is also about Russia's war in Europe, as you in Poland, as the Baltic nations have warned for a very long time. If Putin isn't stopped in Ukraine, then he will look for further territorial gains elsewhere in Europe as well. Is that the message to partners now?
Tak, oczywiście, to przypominamy, my Polacy bardzo często, że po raz pierwszy powiedział...
Yes, of course. We Poles often like to remind ourselves and others what our then President Lech Kaczynski said back in Tbilisi in 2008 during the Russian aggression against Georgia. He stood on the main avenue in Tbilisi where crowds were gathering. He said, it's Georgia today, it could be the Baltic countries tomorrow, Ukraine, and then it could be my country, Poland. So we're fully aware of the fact that these imperial colonial aims are re-emerging. Russia is basically behaving like a colonial country. It wants to colonise others, take away their freedoms, exploit their resources. It wants to juice other people's potential, their economic potential, their natural resources. Today that's what's happening in Ukraine. It would be the same for other countries. Russia wants to extend its sphere of influence and exploit other nations. That's always been the case for centuries. Poland was partitioned for 123 years. Parts of Poland were under Tsarist rule. So we're perfectly aware of what's happening, so that's why we defend ourselves. If someone says Ruski mir, meaning a Russian world or Russian peace, we say absolutely no. Anything but Russia, anything but the Russian sphere of influence.
But is Western support, NATO support, EU support, and of course Polish support, is it doing enough for Ukraine to win this war? Or is it enough just to keep Ukraine in the battle? There needs to be a step up in support militarily, and you've obviously now offered Leopard 2 tanks as well. Is the message to your partners, Germany and others, is there has to be a lot more if Ukraine is going to be able to win this war?
Na razie, w moim przekonaniu, nie robimy nawet wystarczająco dużo, żeby...
For the time being, in my opinion, we're not doing nearly enough to fully halt the Russian invasion. We've indeed done enough to blunt the Russian onslaught through the help that we've provided. I always reiterate that it's first and foremost due to the bravery of the Ukrainian people who defend their homeland. They're perishing, they're giving their lives and spilling their blood on the battlefield against the Russians. We support them by sending them modern weaponry, and despite Russians being far greater in number and possessing more hardware, the Ukrainians are still capable of withstanding them through their bravery and with the help of our modern weaponry. They can withstand them, but not yet stop them. However, in order to beat them, they need so much more help. So herein lies our decision to not only give the Ukrainian army columns of Leopard tanks, but to also call on allies within NATO who also possess the Leopards, so that we can at least gather up an armoured division for Ukraine. That's what we, Poland, have been encouraging at the moment. We are also very grateful to the UK for giving the Ukrainian army a unit of Challenger tanks. We need more of the same.
And yet, so we are nearly 1 year into this war, nearly 9 years into the whole conflict when it started in 2014, which we mustn't forget as well. Can you see any scenario in 2023 that brings a diplomatic solution? It is very hard to see that at the moment.
To bardzo trudno jest powiedzieć, czy są możliwe rozwiązania.
It's very hard to say whether any diplomatic solutions are possible. Firstly, Putin has to understand that he won't win this war, that he can only lose it. So we need to provide even more support. However, we need to see things from the Ukrainian point of view. You have to understand, Ukrainians are losing their lives. They're saying we have to take back all our territory. We have to drive the occupiers out of our land. Once we do that, we can talk about ending the war. This is the point from where we can start a conversation, because this is crucial to those who are dying, those who are under attack. I repeat, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. Ukraine must be at the table during any kind of peace negotiations, because it's Ukraine that was invaded. It's innocent, it never did anything to Russia. The Ukrainians simply wanted to make their own choices, choose their own path for their nations and their politics. All of us living in democratic countries know that this is a sacred right. Russia wants to take this right away from them, and so it invaded.
A couple more questions on this. And one is the price paid by Europe, by the EU. I think your Prime Minister, Mr. Morawiecki, said that some players in Europe, some countries, are behaving in a very selfish way to tackle the energy crisis, which is the economic fallout for Europe as well. Do you believe that countries such as Germany are not working well enough within the EU mechanism and are actually looking after themselves rather than the common good?
Myśmy od początku mówili, że takie inwestycje jak Nord Stream, słynne
We've been saying from the start that investments such as Nord Stream, the well-known Russian Baltic pipeline, meaning Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, are investments that are not economically viable. This is a blatant political move. Russia wants to expand its influence. It wants to dominate the European gas market. It wants to subjugate it at any cost. That's why it engages in these extremely expensive, unprofitable investments. German businesses, of course, were part of this, so there's a mutual self-interest there. And yes, today this poses a problem, mainly for the German authorities, because business holds enormous sway. Germany is an economic powerhouse. This business creates that strength. So today, any opposition to Russia means that these big businesses are impacted, which is without a doubt a problem for Germany. On the other hand, the Russian and German cooperation, and what Russia does as a result, poses a problem for the rest of Europe, particularly for Central Europe. We can never agree to this.
On a different subject, sir, Poland is now right at the centre of European foreign policy towards Ukraine. There is no doubt about it. Poland was right about the threat of Russia. But on another front, you are at odds with the EU. And in fact, the EU is carrying out legal action against Poland because of your judiciary rules as well. The concern about the separation of powers. This is holding up 36 billion euros in loans and grants. Why is this issue still ongoing? Why is it that the EU, of which Poland is a very important and close member, has to be taking you to court over this issue? It seems so strange that you are such central on one front and at odds with the EU on another front.
No niestety trochę to jest tak, że nie wszystkie nasze problemy.
Unfortunately, not all our problems are understood by decision makers and people in the West, who never knew life under the yoke of communism. In many respects, we're still struggling with the remnants of that former system. Among them is the judiciary, where sadly there are still individual cases of judges who sentence people while serving the Communist Party, who belonged to the Communist Party and carried out its orders. Today they call themselves independent judges, but when we came and asked them to step down as their careers are tainted by their association with the former communist regime, incarcerating people, the EU institutions defended them. This for us is completely bewildering. We're saying that we need to take our time to complete these reforms. We're a democratic country and this is going on with the consent of the Polish electorate. I took part in this process during my first term in office, and I won a second election. I was criticised by certain EU institutions, attacked by some EU politicians. In my country, more than 10 million people voted for me to allow me to continue as President of the Polish Republic. People want these issues dealt with because they know that only by closing this case and removing those people will we develop into a fully fledged Western nation. I mean this culturally, mentally and above all in economic terms, to ensure a higher standard of living. That's what's really important to people.
But President, I'm going to make this a bigger issue now as my final question. Is this ultimately about Polish law primacy over EU law, or actually EU actually having the right to tell Poland and other countries what to do on this front?
Chwileczkę. Nie tyle prawo, co
Hold on, it's not so much about the law. We said it's about the primacy of the Polish constitution over European law. It's very clearly stipulated. I'm an advocate of this legal premise of the primacy of the Polish constitution. In the Polish constitution, there are clear provisions in this respect. It states the hierarchy of legal origins in our country. First there's the constitution, then we have acts of law and ratified international agreements, of which EU law is primary, meaning European treaties which do indeed come before parliamentary acts, but not above the Polish constitution.
President, it's been a real pleasure speaking to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time today, sir. I
Dziękuję
hope
bardzo.
the issue gets solved soon and Poland can get those much needed COVID
Ja
funds.
też mam taką nadzieję, że te wszystkie problemy przede wszystkim, że właśnie
I also
te
hope
wszystkie
that all these
problemy
problems
zostaną
will be
rozwiązane.
resolved.
Z jednej
On
strony
the one hand, we're talking
problemach,
about the
które-
issues that Poland has with the
które
European
dzisiaj Polska ma z
institutions,
instytucjami
which are
europejskimi,
withholding
które nie chcą
funds,
dać pieniędzy
which are rightfully
należnych Polsce.
Poland's.
Podkreślam
That's
jeszcze raz,
money
pieniędzy
that's due to the
Polakom
Polish people.
należą po prostu.
On the other hand, of utmost importance to us is to ensure that Russian aggression in Ukraine is stopped. This is the biggest concern for Polish people today. Amongst others, it's the Polish people who help their neighbours from Ukraine. That's why we house and feed their refugees. That's why we send the Ukrainian army our equipment to defend their lands. It's because we know that the most dangerous and difficult thing we're struggling with today is Russian imperialism and aggression.